My my son and I, we like to watch ball games from time to time, and sometimes I like just to watch a good college game. Like I feel like college sports is better than professional sports, and sometimes the thing about college sports, you can watch a college basketball game or a college football game. You can watch two random teams you don't even really care about, but like there's still a good competition. There's still a good game that happens there, and but my son has this obsession that when we watch two random teams that we don't know, he forces me, he'll ask the question, Dad, who are you cheering for? And I'll say, I don't care. Like if the Vols aren't playing, like what's the use? Why are we playing? You know, it doesn't matter what these two teams are doing. And it's funny. I mean, we have this conversation every time we watch a sporting event. He'll say, but Dad, you have to choose. You have to pick who you're cheering for. And then he'll usually tell me, like, I'm cheering for this team. And usually it has to do with one of two things. One, the mascot looks really cool or the uniforms look cool. Or two, he'll see the score at the time, and whichever team is leading at that point in the game, that's the team he's cheering for. I'm cheering for this team because they're winning. You know, and so then he forces me to choose the team that he's not cheering for so he can feel like he won something. But he'll ask me, he knows already at 8, there are certain teams we never cheer for. I mean, you already know where I'm going, don't you? He knows, like, we never cheer for Alabama football. Like, it doesn't matter who they're playing. Doesn't matter. I mean, he knows, like, I mean, any Office fans in here? A few. You know, it's kind of like you're choosing, like, because I mean, if you're thinking about, like, in basketball, we don't cheer for Kentucky basketball, no matter what. If they're playing Duke, it's really difficult because it's like Hitler versus Stalin. Who are you going to cheer for? And it's like that episode in The Office where Michael Scott, you know, he hates Toby. You know, Toby's the HR guy. Everybody hates HR people, you know. And he's like, if I was in a room with Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, and Toby, and I had 2 bullets, I would shoot Toby twice. That's what it's like trying to decide who you're going to cheer for in Duke UK basketball, right? And he'll pose like these weird questions sometimes. He'll be like, but Dad, what if Alabama football is playing Kentucky football? And it's like, you know, the answer is easy. They hope they both lose, right? Now, I know Alabama won last night. Congrats to the Alabama people. I just don't care. So, like, because I'm indifferent. I'm indifferent. Indifference, the definition of indifference means a lack of interest, unconcerned, apathy. In fact, the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference. And what I know is that we are always indifferent to the things that do not directly impact us. If it does not impact us personally, we become indifferent to it. And here's what I know is in our culture, we have become increasingly indifferent to the things of God. We've become indifferent to righteousness. We've become indifferent to the Bible, what God says. We've become indifferent to community and the things that the Lord asks us to be a part of. In fact, you know, we see in our culture this increasing hunger for violence and atrocities. I mean, we live in a culture now that when a fight breaks out, we pick up a phone so that we can record it. You know, today it's not, we don't just read the news, we watch people's worst moments happen in their life. One of the ones that happened recently in the news was a high school student in Las Vegas, and his friend was in a predicament where he was being bullied, and so he took up for his friend, and upon doing so, 10 other boys jumped him, and they literally beat this kid to death on school property. And other kids filmed the whole thing. And you're just watching somebody, and you're watching these kids post it on TikTok and on Snapchat, and they're literally filming this kid's death. And I just wonder, like, you know, for a lot of us, we can even see a news article like that and just be like, man, that's tragic, and keep scrolling. But the question is like, would you be so indifferent if that was your son? You see, because when it directly impacts us, all of a sudden we care. And I think that the problem is that we become so indifferent, we become selfish, that we are only passionate or care about the things that directly make us better, help us. And the thing that we see throughout Scripture is that the things of God should be the things that we are most passionate about, that we should care about the things that God cares about. But what needs to shift is our perspective. And our perspective of our purpose will always determine our attitude towards taking action. Because if you have a wrong perspective of your purpose in life and why God would save you. And now here's what I want to kind of give a disclaimer. If you're here and you're not a Christian, you have no, intention of following Jesus, none of this is probably going to resonate with you. And I want to give you permission to kind of just sit and ask yourself, does this make sense? But for those who call ourselves Christians, if we don't truly wrap our minds and our hearts around our God-given purpose and why we're here, we are missing an opportunity to participate in what God is trying to do throughout the earth. And so for a lot of us, if we don't have the right perspective of our purpose, we don't care to take action. We don't care what our involvement is because I'm too busy trying to live my life to care about what God really wants. But I cannot call myself a Christ follower and become indifferent to the things of God. And so I think that's where a lot of us are. And what we see in Matthew 25, we talk about this in our discipleship group a lot, that sometimes when you're listening to the parables of Jesus or when you read a chapter, because we forget that the Bible was not formed in a book form. That happened in the 2nd century post-resurrection of Jesus. In fact, they had what was called scrolls. If you know the Hebrew Bible, it was one long scroll that was continuously copied over centuries and generations. And then in the 2nd century, they said, hey, we need to put this kind of more in a chapter, verse, book form. And so they put it like this. So for us, we miss sometimes that we'll read these parables and we're like, okay, Jesus is talking about something random here, something random here. But what I try to encourage people when you're reading this stuff is take a 30,000-foot view and ask yourself, how is Jesus weaving these teachings together? And he actually gives 3 parables that all lead to this ending, this culmination in Matthew 25. He gives a parable of the 10 virgins. And if you know the parable of the 10 virgins, there were 10 wise ones who brought oil. Because in that day, and we'll talk about this in the coming weeks with the Advent series, but marriage was arranged differently. Marriage didn't look like it looked like today. In fact, if you were getting married, ladies, what would happen is there would be a contract signed. You would sign this contract to be married to somebody. And this person would go and start building a room onto his father's house. So the fathers were the patriarchs, and their house and their property would continue to grow as their kids married off, and you would just build a room. And there wasn't really a date set for the wedding. It was just hey, when your room is done, he'll come and collect his bride, and they'll have the marriage ceremony, consummate the marriage, and begin to live this life. And so Jesus has given us a picture of hey, there is this period of time of waiting, but you have to be responsible in the waiting. And of course, there were 10 foolish virgins who were not responsible in the waiting, and they missed out. They missed it when the bridegroom came to collect them. Then you see this parable of 3 different people who were given a specific amount of talents. And what you see is that it didn't matter about the amount, but it mattered what they did with the amount they were given. And then Jesus finishes with this powerful, almost sobering parable about this end judgment that was to come, and there would be this separation, and on one side would be people who were faithful, the other side of people who were not. And they were all tied together because what we see are 3 themes. One is time management, resource management, and relationship management. In other words, there is an urgency, there's a mission, there's a management, and there is a ministry. We call it stewardship. All 3 parables, you see a theme of stewardship. And that word stewardship in the Greek is oikonia, which is where we get our English word economy. There is a God economy. And we are either choosing to live for our economy or God's economy. And that's why I challenge you as believers in Christ, if you call yourself a Christ follower, you don't have an economy, you are a part of God's economy. And the word stewardship actually means to manage a household. In other words, you have been given something to steward. Stewardship is not just about stuff. Stewardship is about your entire life. And what you see are people who were foolish in stewarding their time and their urgency, people who were foolish in stewarding the resources they were given, and people who were foolish in stewarding the relationships and the people that were placed in front of us in life. And Jesus tells us what's going to happen at the end, that we are all going to be held accountable for this stewardship. Are y'all hearing me so far? Y'all tracking? And what you see in all three is the same theme, and that is this: the master is returning. The master is returning. That is the theme that you see. And in all three instances, what you have to understand is that we will give an account regardless of the amount. Because some of us think like, man, I don't sing like those people on the stage, or I don't preach or teach, or I don't do this. And so we think that our gifts and our talents, what you forget is that in every story, everyone is given a talent and an ability, and all of them are gifts from God. Like, God gave you a certain gift and he gave you certain responsibilities, not based on how awesome you are. He didn't watch you be born and go like, you know what, this baby's got something going. And then he didn't look at another baby and go like, you know what, let's bless their hearts, right? We all know what that means in the South. But the Bible teaches that through his grace and his love, each of us are given specific gifts, talents, abilities, resources that we are to be faithful with. To steward for his glory, not our own. Y'all tracking so far? So what happens is this particular person in the parable of the talents, his entire perspective is jaded. And I think for a lot of us, our perspective is jaded when it comes to purpose. And the first thing that he's jaded by, or his perspective is messed up on, is the expected outcome. What did he think the expected outcome was going to be when the master returned? And he says this is interesting. He says, I knew you were a harsh man, so I hid it. Here is your money back. I mean, I can imagine his whole persona. He's like, guess what? Look at this. I didn't lose any of it. Here you go. He thought that the outcome was that he would want his money back. What I find interesting is that he doesn't even take the money back for himself. What does he do with it? The master takes it and gives it to the more faithful servant. Because we forget the expected outcome is not that God wants something back, but he wants faithfulness. And with faithfulness comes fruitfulness. And here's what we need to understand in this house today. You are not responsible for the fruitfulness, but you are responsible for the faithfulness. When I am faithful, God produces the fruit in my life. And some of us will get caught up on trying to produce the fruit that we will find ourselves unfaithful. And so this was the problem. He had a skewed view or a wrong perspective of what the expected outcome. Here's basically what he said. I know I didn't make any more, but at least I didn't make any less. That is the greatest phrase ever given by a lazy Christian. I know I didn't do anything with what God gave me, but hey, at least I didn't squander what I have. My attitude has always been, Lord, I don't want to stand before you with anything else left in my pockets. I pray that everything that you have given me, I have stewarded and invested that to help participate in the building. And make no mistake about it, we do not build God's kingdom, but we participate in the building of the kingdom. Through how we live our lives, through how we steward our resources, through how we steward our time, through how we steward our relationships. And so he had a misconception of the expected outcome. Some of us think that the expected outcome is just for you to live some sort of rigid, ordered religious life. As long as I check the boxes of going to church, as long as I check the boxes of doing the big Christian things, my everyday life doesn't matter. And I'm telling you, that is not what God is requiring of us. What he is requiring us is faithfulness in every aspect of our lives. Every aspect, our jobs, everything. And that leads us to the second one, which is he had a skewed perspective of the expected responsibilities. What did he think his responsibility was with his purpose? I want you to see this. This is fascinating to me. Because when you read other translations of this text, it says he was given 1 talent. Right? Here we see that it's silver. You make no mistake about it. He was given the least, but it was still a lot. In fact, this equaled like millions of dollars in our economy today. So I want you to imagine, like, he didn't just have like a jewel. When you read this story, sometimes like, oh, he had just 1 talent and he hid it, like he put it under the bed. No, imagine the time, energy, and resources it took to hide this 1 talent. He spent more time digging to hide his resource than he did to actually invest and multiply it. And that's a reminder that most of us will spend more time and energy in our lives building our own kingdom instead of being faithful to his. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, he's probably borrowing stuff. He's asking his friends to bring shovels. They are investing a lot of time and resource and energy to actually be counterproductive and rebellious to what God's asked them to do. That's incredible to me. Because we think that somehow our responsibility is to make sure we don't screw this thing up. And so we never risk anything in our lives stepping out in faith and being obedient to him. You know what your primary calling is in life? Because some people sit in church for decades going, I'm just trying to figure out what God's calling me to do. Your primary calling is to know and love the Lord. That's it. And your secondary calling is that everything that flows from your life is the primary expression of your primary calling. That as I know and love the Lord, now I know how I use my gifts and talents in my workplace, at home, as a dad, as a mom, as a student in high school, whatever it may be. And the problem is we have flipped the script because we have turned the gospel into the American dream gospel, and we have spent our entire lives trying to fulfill the second calling over the primary calling. And so you end up with a church filled with people who are doing a lot of religious works but don't even know or love the Lord. It was quiet like this in the first. Is everybody awake today? Like this is, and so what happens is you spend your entire life figuring out what you're supposed to do instead of asking yourself, who am I supposed to become? God, help me to become a person who loves like you. Help me to become a person who serves like you. Help me to become a person of peace like you. Help me to become a person of joy like you, Jesus. And through that, guess what? That will totally revolutionize who you are at work, who you are at home, who you are in the streets, who you are to your neighbors, who you are in public. But we spend our entire lives trying to figure out the secondary. We think our responsibility is to do for the kingdom instead of become more like Christ. But as I become more like Christ, he will teach me how to do more for the kingdom. Come on, y'all. His expected responsibility. And you know why it was messed up? You know why his perspective was messed up? Because my perspective of responsibility is shaped by my relationship. Don't miss this. You know what he said? This is powerful. He goes on to think of his relationship as more of this slave versus son relationship. He was approaching this as if this master cared more about what he did than who he was becoming. And for most of us, that is our issue, is we have a skewed perspective of who God is to our lives. And that leads us to the third one, which is this, the excuse. He has a skewed perspective of his excuse. Look what he says. This is crazy. His excuse was fear. He says this statement, I knew you were a harsh man. Now I want to stop right there. Where in the parable do you see that to become true? You never see that in the parable. You never see any ounce of evidence that the master was a harsh man. He says, I knew you were a harsh man, so I was afraid, so I hid it. Can I tell you, that is our biggest issue in life. We assume something about the character of God that is not true, then we disobey him, then we blame him for our disobedience. Now, where do we find that at? Genesis 3. Adam and Eve believed a lie from Satan about the character of God. God does not care for you. He just doesn't want you to be smart like him. God does not have your best interest at heart. That led to them to rebel against God himself. And then, oh, by the way, once they got caught and suffered the consequences, what did? They blamed God for their disobedience. I get it. Like all of us grew up with some sort of perspective or slant towards God the Father. In fact, when you hear that F word, Father, it does not bring positive images to your mind because of your experiences with your earthly fathers. But what we have to understand is that if we do not understand the heart and character of God, we will not understand the gospel and we will not understand the Word of God. Because you're already growing up with a different perspective of who God is. Do you realize what the fear of the Lord is? When the Bible talks about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, fear of the Lord is the awe and wonder at the holiness, righteousness, and goodness of God. In fact, it's this deep realization that, man, the creator of the universe loved me enough to say, I want you to be my child. I want to adopt you as my child to be a part of my kingdom. When you come to the realization and the contrast of what you deserve versus what God gave you, it brings you to this place of love and worship and adoration to say, God, I want you to have my life. In other words, it is birthed out of love, not out of obligation. When I understand God's heart for me, it changes my heart for him. Because here's what's amazing. If he was truly afraid, don't you think you would have said, well, why? And that was the master's point. If you were truly afraid that was going to happen, then why didn't you at least do it out of fear? He had a terrible excuse. And it also reminds us that fear is a limited motivator, isn't it? When we try to scare people into the kingdom or we try to scare people in relationship with God, the only thing that we have to come to the realization of is that, man, there is a Father who loved you so much that he does not want you to suffer eternity in hell. And he gave his life on a cross for you. And if you understand that at the core, that God's character and love is for you, not against you, it should change our entire heart to want to live our lives in adoration for him. But fear, don't miss this, fear will always lead to rebellion. Always. Because you don't see yourself as a son or a daughter, you see yourself as just a simple slave. He had to change his perspective. So, what's our responsibility as we close out this series and we really kind of reflect on this for a few moments? Because I want to remind you that if you get the story wrong, you get life wrong. Because if the story that you're living in is that God is up in heaven and he's the lightning bolt God, he's ready to push the nuke button anytime you mess up, and that every time you walk through something hard in life that God's punishing you, guess what? It's going to mess with your theology and it's going to mess you up for the rest of your life. Because the story you live in becomes the story you live out. And you know how you are living in that story? You're handing it down to your kids. Your whole goal as a parent becomes control, manipulation, and obedience instead of love. And when that happens, how many of you know kids will rebel? And you know what God's trying to teach you? That's you and me. If you do not see me as a good father who wants to give you good things to participate in what I'm trying to do in the earth, you will miss your purpose. because you will see it only as behavior-based religion. Are y'all getting this today? And so our responsibility as a church is really summed up in 3 areas. It's evangelism, discipleship, and formation. It's proclaiming this gospel, teaching people to obey, and coming into a life, that abundant life where we are becoming more like Christ, less like ourselves. And we say it like this here, that we have a mission to resurrect family trees for generations to come. Because I believe that the families is where we are seeing a lot of the brokenness. I mean, think about this. We see this sobering end to Matthew 25. It's an expectation that the master has, that the gospel comes in fullness to the broken and those who seem like the least of these to the rest of the world. Know this, that they are not the least to God. They are least to the people who are so lazy building their own lives that it's an inconvenience to actually serve God by reaching broken people. Which, by the way, we are those broken people. So when we start talking about broken people and the least of these, we forget I'm one of those. We start thinking about others instead of ourselves. And so you know what I find fascinating about that ending parable when Jesus is separating the goat and the sheep is that he tells them, like, man, come and inherit the kingdom. He's like, you're blessed because you fed me when I was hungry. You clothed me when I was naked. You came and visited me. And you know what their response was? We had no clue. What do you mean? That was you. And like they were so busy doing the ministry that they were surprised by their own righteousness. That's pretty incredible. But you know what was true on the other hand? The people who were unfaithful were just as surprised. Do you know why? Because both groups were busy doing what their hearts were set on. Are you hearing me today? Could you imagine standing before God and you're like, I don't even know if I did this thing right. And he's like, come on and enter in. He's like, man, you fed me. And you're like, bro, I didn't even know. I was just busy doing what my heart was set on. And here's what I want you to know is that when your heart is set on the things of God, you will do righteous deeds without even knowing it. Because now your life is lived for the things that God cares about. And in the same vein, the people who were disobedient and unfaithful had no clue that they were being unfaithful because they were so busy doing what their hearts were set on. And that was building their own kingdom. And so for us as a church, what is our heart set on? And, you know, when we started this church almost 12 years ago, looking at the demographics, I knew that a lot of people in this community, their life looked like my life growing up. And that's why I had such a heart for this community and a heart for the families in this community, because what we are seeing, what a lot of us have seen in our lives, and if you haven't seen this, thank God. Be grateful that God has brought you up in a different environment. But what we see are poverty and brokenness in a lot of communities. This is what I grew up in. And the problem is that the church sometimes is really good at addressing surface level issues, or what I like to call the leaves, but we don't get to the root. And we don't minister to the root. And my passion as the pastor of this church is like, how do we deal with root issues so that we can resurrect family trees? Are y'all with me so far? And what we've got adult criminality. And can I tell you that the most of this is the second one, which is dad deprivation. Can I tell you one of the biggest crises we have in our culture is the removal of dads. Either dads in the home or dads who are in the home but not really there. And I'm telling you, when we fix that problem, when we address that problem, things will change drastically. Because 90% of what you are seeing out of the issues, of the root issues, come from the dad in the home. And so we have dad deprivation in family. We have structure as an issue. We have childhood trauma. The thing of being a part of our men's retreat and our teen retreat that I know of is that the majority of the people in our church have grown up in some sort of trauma. Whether it's sexual trauma, abuse, these things have affected the lives of adults. We have 50-year-olds in our church walking around that are still emotionally immature like 16-year-olds because they've never dealt with the trauma in their lives. They're still living out their midlife crisis because they never got to be a child and a kid. So now their kids as adults still trying to achieve something to earn a love and affirmation. I'm telling you, this is root issues. We have poor education, juvenile criminality, unemployment, poor decision making, welfare dependence, housing insecurity, poor health and health care. I mean, we're one of the sickest countries on the face of the planet, yet we're the most wealthiest. Make it make sense. It's mindsets. It's hearts. There's root issues. Come on, somebody. Addiction and where you grew up. All of these things are the root that are affecting the fruit. And so we're getting a lot of bitter fruit. And this has nothing to do with like church. Like you can grow up in church and still have these root issues that are producing the brokenness in our lives. This is what we're trying to address as a church. And so for us, we have 5 what we call legacy lanes that when we give of our purpose, our time, our talent, and our treasure, and we come together, I believe these 5 things are what we are most focused on. And the first one is this: it's local missions. It truly is getting to the root problems that are happening in our community. It's addressing broken homes. Can I tell you that the church for too long, we've just become the Band-Aid people in communities. What I mean by that is like, if we have people in poverty and brokenness, the church is where you come to get your bills paid. Instead of, how do we teach them to get out of the poverty and brokenness they're in? Which, guess what? Takes time and effort and work. You're not going to have a 1-hour counseling session with somebody and all of a sudden their poverty mindset is broken and their lives are changed forever. Like next Saturday, I'm excited. We're gonna. It's one of our largest outreaches of the year, our G Tree outreach for Christmas. We're helping minister to 800 kids next Saturday. That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, so a few of you are awake. But if we are making an impact in our community, that number should continue to go down, not up. Because if you have the same families for 10 years stuck in the same cycles, then what are we really doing? How are we equipping our children and our kids to grow up with a different mindset when it comes to their finances, when it comes to their spiritual health, when it comes to their emotional health? Are y'all with me? Like for us, it's saying like, how do we reach the least of these when it comes to jail and juvenile ministry? We've got people in our church right now that are involved in jail ministry and juvenile ministry. We need more volunteers to be a part of these type of ministries. When it comes to discipleship, you know, next Sunday night is our interest meeting for starting our brand new discipleship group ministry. I think we've got anywhere from 75 to 80 people signed up for that interest ministry. But honestly, we need more and more people interested and passionate about discipleship, who are saying, listen, I want to expose myself to growing in the Word of God. Because I'm going to tell you, one of the greatest problems we have in our church culture is that people do not know the Bible. And not only, it's not even that you don't know it, it's that you don't care to know it. That's the bigger issue. We have become indifferent to the Word of God. Because after all, somebody's going to put it on the screen for you. Somebody else is going to read it for you. But we don't ask ourselves, God, what does this have to do for my life personally? This is important. One of the things we're trying to do is say, like, how do we continue to let our church look more like the church that's going to stand before God, that's with all nations, all tongues, all races? How do we continue? I believe we are the most diverse church in our community, but we still have a long ways to go. And so one of the things, we've got several people who have formed a translation team. It's so powerful. You'll see in our Christmas experiences, we got 2 specific experiences that are bilingual. We don't want to start a Hispanic experience. We want to say, how can we invite Spanish-speaking only populations into this one and they feel like they're a part of it? That's something that they're working on. They're passionate about. They've already come up with solutions on how they're making that happen. If you guys haven't met Lazaro, man, that guy is a blessing that God brought here from Nicaragua. But that guy, him, Luis, Juan, several of them have been working. He calls these Spanish-speaking communities all the time and invites them to be a part of our experiences. For many weeks, Lazaro sat in the back one-on-one and was translating live in part, like he would whisper to them what I'm saying from the stage. He can't translate some of my stuff. You know what I'm saying? He's like, I don't know what to tell you about that. But anyways, But then they came up with, there was an app where they can listen on real time. Listen, this is crazy, y'all. Juan found, it's an AI app. Listen to this AI, this Terminator stuff's going to kill us. But anyways, it takes the message, translates it to Spanish using my voice. Like I was listening to me preach and speaking in Spanish. I was like, I sound good. And they're like, how do we create more opportunities for people to come in here and feel like, man, this church thought about me. They thought about me. That's what we're investing in, is what we're excited about. And the problem is when we become indifferent to God and his purposes for us, we become indifferent to others. We see the mission, managing, and ministry as inconvenient because we see ourselves as the most important. So for us, it's saying, like, how do we, my love for community, outreach, serving, generosity is birthed out of this deep realization of the awe and humility I have for God. That's what it's birthed. It's not, I'm not asking you, listen, I don't want you to get involved in any of this if you're going to be hateful about it. I don't want you to get involved. I don't want you to give a dime or serve, get connected if you're going to be upset about it. If it's going to be an inconvenience. Because I don't want your stuff. I don't want your involvement. I just want you to know God's heart, and I want God to have your heart. That's my desire as the pastor of this church. Because I'm going to tell you, for the last 12 years, God has done more with a small remnant who is given more of themselves than a large number of people who will attend on a Sunday morning. Number 2, our second lane is next generation and family. We are working to continue to resource families to help disciple their kids. If you have kids in kids ministry, you get an email every single week updating you what's going on in kids ministry. You get resources all the time. The question I would ask you is, are you involved in those resources, and do you know what's going on with your kids? Because all of that is to equip you to help disciple your children. Our job is not to disciple your children. We can't. We only get them for like an hour, 2 hours a week. That's it. The primary disciple maker in the home is the mother and father. And so at the first of the year, we're going to be walking through the book of Mark. I'm excited. It'll be our longest series ever. We're going to go from January to Easter, walking through the Gospel of Mark. And guess what? Our kids ministry and student ministry are doing the same thing. Whole church together. We're going to be equipping you, giving you resources on how you can walk through Mark with your kids and actually share the scriptures and actually help disciple your kids. Because I'm telling you, it matters. Dads, you matter in what is happening in these homes. You know, somebody said, we got to reach the next generation. I agree, but reaching the next generation starts with reaching dads. You know why? Because if you kids get on fire for God and you go home to an apostate home, it doesn't matter. And so for us to say, like, how do we continue to partner together to disciple kids? You know, one of the things you got to realize is that these kids are running out of room on Wednesday nights. We don't have enough volunteers or small group leaders to facilitate what God has been sending us on Wednesday. We're averaging 200 students a week on Wednesday nights. And right now, small groups are overpopulated because we don't have enough small group leaders. And I'm not talking about, like, we have small group leaders. I'm telling you, we have the best doggone small group leaders around. They care for these students. They're trying to disciple them. They're trying to mentor them. They're trying to pour into them. But there's not enough of them. If every student brought a friend next week, we wouldn't have enough room in this auditorium to hold them. We're running out of small group space. And so that's why when you ask, like, why does expansion matter? Why do buildings matter? Because God, for whatever reason, in his goodness and grace, nothing because of what we have done, has said, I'm going to make this a place where the broken can come and find life. And so how do we create room for that? So one of the things we talked about is expansion. You'll see, the resurrected family tree. What you want to see us do with kids and students is, how do we continue to create healthy family outlets? How do we create intentional fathers in the home? How do we institute education and rehabilitation ministries? My mother battled addiction for 25 years. Rehabilitation and drug addiction ministries are not just flashy classes that you do every 6 weeks or every 12 weeks. We need people who say, man, I'm willing to walk with people for years through this. Discipleship, wholeness ministries, emotionally healthy marriages, and Christ-centered homes. And those things that we can do with number 3, our third legacy, which is third place expansion. And that word third place just simply means everybody has a third place. We have home, we have work, and then you spend time at a third place. What we want to do is create somewhere in our community where this can be a safe, Christ-centered third place. You'll notice that in the spring, we're getting ready to cut the ribbon on our brand new disc golf course for some of our community. We'll have like a walking track that we're doing. And then, of course, you're going to see the drawings that we did when we finished phase 2. This is kind of just a picture of looking at the corner of the building from that space. But phase 3, what we are looking to do is expand for our students. You see full court basketball courts, pickleball, and then the spaces to create more small group opportunities with an outdoor baptistry that serves as a feature throughout the week. If you've not been here on a Wednesday night and watch these students, I mean, right now we have a portable, torn, it's like a rough and rugged basketball goal. Those kids are just, they don't even care. They're just out there. Could you imagine if you created a space for a community where they can show up every afternoon and fellowship and have a place to meet and do other small groups? You'll see a playground out back for our small children. Go ahead and go to the next drawing. You'll see a playground out back. And this is the future site of our youth facility, which will be a community rec center. And if you guys were here for Vision Rally, you heard me say, I have a vision to have a rec center that is open all the time. It is fully employed, and there'll be opportunities for kids, students, and adults to have a place to go and build community. That's our passion and our heart. That's just a few of the things that we're trying to do and create third place expansion. One of the things is understanding we're out of, we just stepped into this space in 2021 and we're already running out of room. And so for some of us, it's saying man, how do we continue to create space for lost people, broken people, families to come and experience community here? And so that leads us to our fourth legacy lane, which is national missions. And that's church planting. We got to invest in a church plant in Colorado last year. This year we're investing in Bowling Green, Kentucky, City Light Church, Pastor Brendan Washington, who's planting a church there. We believe in church planting. We believe in expanding the kingdom through church planting and church revitalization. We've helped churches revitalize. We've helped churches add on and start over. And, we have a great existing relationship with a few of the churches in our own community. We've been sending pastors and preachers over to local churches who are missing pastors right now. We care about the local church in general. And then last but not least, our fifth legacy lane is global missions. And that's not just saying hey, we think we're the answer going somewhere. Right now, our partnership with Costa Rica, they're teaching us just as much about outreach and reaching people as that we're going to help them. We've been able to help connect them with 5 other churches that are taking groups on a continuous basis every year. We just took our first trip this past fall. We've got another trip planned for spring break, and we can't even facilitate all the people that want to go. We are building a tight relationship with Pastor Miguel and Church of the City in Costa Rica. And if you have not seen the work that they are doing, it is absolutely incredible. And so I'll say all that to say this, that the price of indifference is too high to pay. It's too high to pay. To just get to this place in our life where we're I don't care. I see my good friend Jeff sitting out there, and I know, indifference is too high of a cost to pay. And I watched God revolutionize your life, man. It's incredible to watch. I was talking to a gentleman after the first experience. He just had a surgery where he almost died, and man, there was just something different in his eyes. He came to me, he said, I just want you to know, Pastor, I don't hope anymore, I know. And I watched God just wreck his life this morning. I'm watching more and more of these dads and moms come to this place of realization, my life is bigger than just me. I'm watching God use students to reach their parents. Saw a baptism a few weeks ago where God wrecked the young man, and through that, man, God worked a work where the son baptized the dad and the dad baptized the son, and that happened on several occasions in the same weekend. That's the stuff. That's the root, the dirt, the in the dirt, in the roots ministry that we're after. That's our purpose. Carrying the gospel to the least of these, and the least of these is me. This is not where I find my significance. My significance is not in preaching or teaching. My significance is being a son of the King. And who I become flows into how I teach and preach. It flows into how I lead my household. I could step off this stage tomorrow and never preach on this stage again, and I would still just have just as much significance, because my significance was found at the foot of the cross. And that's where your significance is found. Your purpose is found in knowing and loving the God of the universe, who loved you so much that he stepped out of the cosmos into human skin so that he could suffer as you suffer, die a death in your place, and then raise again on the third day so that you can experience life and life everlasting. That's your significance. You're his prized possession. That's your purpose. Everything else flows from that. If you get that wrong, you'll get everything else wrong. Because I want to tell you something. We cannot afford to be indifferent towards Jesus and his return. He is coming back. There must be a sense of urgency. There must be a sense of understanding that, God, what have you required of me while I'm here on this earth? Because my time is limited. I turned 46 today, y'all. 46 young. But I'm going to tell you something. Yesterday, I was sitting in your shoes. I know that sounds like a cliche, but I'm telling y'all, life is but a vapor. What are you going to do with the time given you? If you wait till you're my age to figure it out, you're going to live with a lot of regret. We can't afford to be indifferent towards the Holy Spirit who makes us ready for the return of Jesus. We can't be indifferent towards the resources that God has given us. We can't be indifferent towards the people who are in need around us. We cannot be indifferent towards the humanity of lost people who will stand judgment before God and not know him. The cost is too high. So my challenge to you is simple. Pray. In a few moments, get an opportunity to pray. Pray for our community. Pray for the lost in your own life that you know. Pray that God will reveal to you, God, how do I need to make myself more available to your purposes? Give. One of the ways that you can help invest is by saying, like, I want to give towards this. I want to, you have those Make a Difference offering cards in your seat. And you can say, like, listen, what is God asking me of me in my own generosity? How can I give towards this? It gives you the whole breakdown on the back of how you can be a part of this Make a Difference offering. You can give online. Just make sure you designate to the Make a Difference offering. If you give a check today, make sure you write on the check, Make a Difference offering. But that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm just challenging you to give. And again, not obligated. I don't want to force you. If you're going to begrudgingly write it, don't do it. What I would say is that if you believe in what's happening here, if you believe in the mission, the managing, and the ministry, then you would say, God, what are you asking me to give today? And then I'll just ask you to ask God, God, help me make myself available. Help me understand where in my life I need to change my perspective when it comes to the expected outcome, my expected responsibility, and what is my excuse? What's my excuse? Because I want to tell you something. There might be games where you can be indifferent to who wins. But this game matters. And we can't afford to be indifferent.